Lincoln Presidential Museum, opened in Springfield in 2005, presents an unparalleled use of technology to tell the story of history. Critics refer to it as a forest of rubber Lincolns and Disneyland paraphernalia. Admirers say it's the only way to reach a new generation. What do you think? We'll hear more about this from the man who helped design the museum, Thomas Schwartz, Illinois State Historian, when we return on Civil War Talk Radio.
How much time each day do you spend managing your personal or business calendar? 15 minutes, a half an hour, maybe more. Is the conference room available for next week's meeting? And how many people do you have to ask to find out? Have you ever misplaced or, worse yet, lost your day planner or handheld device? And what do you do about that missing information? Do you own or operate a salon or carpet cleaning business? How about a realty office or any one of 1,000 other service-based organizations? Can your customers make their appointments even when your office is closed? If any of this sounds familiar, then Schedule Online is the solution for you. For more information, call toll-free 888-668-3355. That's 888-668-3355. Or visit us online at www.scheduleonline.com.
Before we return to our riveting drama, our sponsor insists that we listen to a radio show about television.
I'm Jim Benson, host of A Different Sort, as I direct you toward a galaxy of TV memories guaranteed to leave you spellbound while I present many of the greatest legends in television history on the TV Time Machine, every Wednesday beginning at 4 p.m. right here on World Talk Radio.
World Talk Radio, bringing the world to you.
To speak with our show hosts or guests during the live show, call us toll-free in North America, 888-514-2100. Everywhere else, call 001-858-268-3068.
This is Jerry Prokopovich with Civil War Talk Radio. My guest today is Thomas Schwartz, Illinois State Historian, and the Chief Historical Consultant on the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Museum that opened in 2005. Tom, I want to return in just a moment to our discussion of what stories the museum tells, but let me start by dredging up a more painful memory for you, which I know you'll enjoy. The story of who directs the museum and the candidates who were at one time named as possible directors. Illinois is a state known for its political history, going back to Lincoln and Douglas, to the years of Mayor Daley. It's a colorful place, and the museum didn't escape Illinois politics. What happened there?
Well,
and I know you want to keep your job, so you want to tread carefully, but
no, one of the things that was discussed in the press was an attempt by a previous administration to place close associates in various positions, but particularly the director's position was being discussed as being reserved for the chief of staff.
This was the governor's chief of staff.
The governor's chief of staff, correct.
Who was not a historian.
No. Now, it was an allegation. I mean, people need to understand that there has never been any smoking gun to show that it, in fact, was something that was seriously discussed. What gave it currency was that the previous governor never would outright deny the possibility. Would say that no, I'm not going to, I haven't decided to name him director, but I think he would make a fine director. And so with that kind of statement, obviously people in Illinois assume, well, this is a done deal. There's a great deal of ink spilled in the press. Richard Norton Smith, who had been considering the position if it had been offered, withdrew his name, and then immediately there was a more press outrage, and a blue ribbon panel was created. A search was done nationwide, and an offer was made at the very end of the previous governor's administration to Harold Holzer, who, after looking at the situation, declined to accept the position. Then, with the new governor, the current governor, Governor Rod Blagojevich, he did a national search and selected Richard Norton Smith, who has really done a wonderful job. With his being named, all of the previous controversy disappeared, and whatever questions had been raised about the leadership of this institution have also evaporated. There's unanimity that he is an excellent director. He's operated 4 other presidential libraries and museum, has set up the Robert Dole Center at the University of Kansas, and so his credentials are impeccable.
I don't think anyone can question that it is a happy ending to that story, that Richard Norton Smith is certainly, if he's not qualified to run a presidential museum, then nobody is. And so things did work out for the best in the end. And obviously he accepted the offer after declining the initial one when things were still perhaps more controversial. But things worked out well, and you now have someone who is trained in the field, recognized in the field, an expert in what he does. And the Lincoln world, the historical world, breathes a sigh of relief that whether it was likely or not, there is no political, I don't work for the state, I can say it, a political hack filling the role of museum director and reducing it to a featherbed where former politicians can draw pay for not doing anything.
Yeah.
So it's worked out well. Also, you want to be sure to do as you've done, mention Richard Norton Smith repeatedly. When I worked at a Lincoln Museum some years ago, I did a radio interview along with the person at that time who was my boss's boss, who didn't care for the museum director very much. And during the whole interview, she kept doing all the talking. I didn't say much. And during a final break, I said, "Don't you think we should mention the director's name?" And the boss's boss looked at me and said, "Do we have to?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I think we do." So I made an enemy there, and then I didn't make any friends because I hadn't mentioned the name enough. So it didn't. Loyalty was not repaid. It didn't work out. But you've done a good job here in mentioning Richard Norton Smith, who fully deserves it. I'm not being glib when I say that. He really is obviously highly qualified to direct the museum.
Well, the people who have seen him on TV, that's pretty much what you get. I mean, he has that. There's a certain irreverence there, but also a very bright and sharp mind, and kind of just a fun person to be around. Just full of stories and anecdotes, and of course, he's done some amazing things in his life, and also known a number of not only presidents but also leading political figures, and has written speeches for them. Has been kind of a ghostwriter. So, and is a wonderful writer in his own right. Anyone who's read any of his historical works, whether it be the biography of Colonel McCormick or of Thomas Dewey, knows how well he writes.
He's working on a book on the Rockefellers now. Is that correct?
On Nelson Rockefeller.
Nelson Rockefeller. Okay.
Oh.
Now, let me keep you on the hot seat for a minute here. You mentioned Harold Holzer, who works at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and has written a number of important books on Lincoln. He declined an offer to come to Springfield. You and I know Harold, and I think it's not unfair to call him the consummate New Yorker. In Springfield, Springfield is a Midwestern town. I've been there many times. You know it intimately. I'm not sure how well Harold and Springfield would have coexisted. Richard Norton Smith speaks his own mind, as you say, can be amusing and irreverent. How's he doing in Springfield?
Well, he hasn't left yet, and which is always a good sign. But I think the key to succeeding in any community is that you accept it to the degree you can, and then if it gets to be too overwhelming, you find a refuge, whether it be within the community or if it means taking trips. But I think Richard has he came here with a mission, and that was to make this thing succeed and to reverse whatever negative public images that existed. I think again he has succeeded admirably. No one has questioned the professionalism of the institution. We will be just one day shy of being open 1 month. We had our 50,000th visitor, and it looks like by this Sunday, that was May 18th. It looks like this Sunday we will hit our 70,000th visitor. So the attendance is really well beyond what we thought it would be in this short period of time.
Well, that congratulations for that, and anything that brings people into a historical institution is of obvious value. But getting back to the story about Lincoln himself, your story focuses on Lincoln, on humanizing Lincoln, on telling the story of Lincoln as a person. And there are people who have criticized that or have suggested the technology is too glitzy, too Disney-like. John Y. Simon is famous for characterizing the life-size figures as rubber Lincolns.
Yeah.
How do you respond to those critics?
Well, John's a wonderful guy and a very smart guy and a wonderful historian. And no one would deny any of that. His work with the Graham Papers has set the standard in documentary editing. On the other hand, the first thing that they teach you in school, whether it be graduate or otherwise, is that you need to do your homework and you need to do the reading. You need to have read the book before you can talk about it. John's criticisms of us have occurred before he had any knowledge of our plans. He has yet to see it completed. And so I always have to smile when he keeps throwing charges against us and not knowing how these figures actually work with the historical artifacts and the other museum techniques that we've employed. The notion of representational figures being degrading or diminishing Lincoln in any way is meaningless. The people who have been through, whether it be scholars, for example, your mentor, David Herbert Donald, went through and thought the museum was wonderful. He thought it worked. He didn't see anything irreverent or diminishing in the use of the figures, and thought they were well crafted, well done, and actually had a very powerful emotional impact that it imparted in understanding the story. And that has been seconded by other historians that we know, Gene Baker at Goucher, Mark Neely at Penn State. But more importantly, we have high school and middle school teachers who come and see this and think that it's wonderful. And probably the most telling segment of our audience are those 25 to 30% of school kids, grades 4 to 11, that when they come into that plaza area and see the figures and see the recreated cabin and forest from Indiana and White House, they immediately silence and are just kind of overwhelmed by the powerful visual images that they see. And when they leave the museum, they're talking about what they've seen. They're not talking about, who did what, or, who made a fool of himself or herself, but rather they're talking about the museum. And what we're hearing from parents is that the next day when they wake up, they're still talking about what they've seen in the museum. Now, all of it, albeit it's anecdotal, but what it's suggesting is that the museum is doing exactly what we hoped it would do, and that it is having an immediate impact, emotional impact with the visitor, and takes them immediately into the story, so that when they're leaving the museum, they're thinking about what they've seen and talking about what they've seen, and that is carried on even to the next day.
That's certainly an important goal. If you can achieve that, especially in this age of jaded audiences of children who've been bombarded with images since they were infants, if you can make such an impact that students come out talking about it, then you've really accomplished something, I think. I hear the music, which says we're going to take another short break. But when we come back, we'll talk more about not just the fact that students are talking about it, but what people are saying. What do they actually see in the museum? What do they get from it? What stories does it tell us about Abraham Lincoln? What alternative stories doesn't it tell us about Abraham Lincoln? There's lots more to talk about with Tom Schwartz, Illinois State historian, here on Civil War Talk Radio.